Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is Understanding React.js at Florida Drupal Camp 2021. The slide deck is already available at that URL, udrupal.com/understanding-react.js. And the code example that I'm going to present is also already available, so everything will be there for you to review after the session. Florida Drupal Camp is a safe space, and we invite you to abide to the code of conduct. And if you need to report something, Amy, June, and Mike Anello are your point contacts. We're going to have a contribution day tomorrow, so we will invite you to get involved and contribute back to the project. So we're going to learn about React.js today. Let's get right into it. Why do we want to use React? It has a great benefit in that you are able to learn the core framework once and apply the knowledge everywhere. With React.js, you can write applications for the web, like a web page, a web application. You can write mobile applications, VR, desktop, and so on. So there is this idea of once you learn the library, you can apply something that is called a renderer, and that is going to convert that main code into the environment specific that you want to target. For example, web, mobile, VR, desktop, and there are actually 20 plus renderers. Like you can create CLI applications, for example, and so on. And in that website, you can look at many of the React renderers that are available. So your knowledge is reusable. Also, you can use React in an incremental fashion. Let's say that you have an existing Drupal website and you want to integrate with React. You might decide to start just with one block of the whole website. And if you decide that it went well, you might decide to continue implementing React, for example, to the sidebar and to as many sections of the page as you need, to the point that you can replace the whole page and go fully decoupled, where Drupal is your content repository and React is your front end, or you can stop at any point and decide only some sections of the website to be powered by React. For example, I worked on a project that everything is powered by Drupal except for the checkout experience. Like once you want to buy something on the website, that workflow is a React application, but everything else is the Drupal that you know about. So it's up to you to decide how much you want to implement and when to stop. Another thing is that React has a very good developer experience. There is a small API surface. You can literally read the whole documentation in an afternoon. And after that, you will be very well prepared to tackle any project. React uses existing JavaScript constructs. That means that you don't have to learn something new, like something specific to React. The JavaScript that you already know is going to help you later on. And the more that you work with React, the more you work with JavaScript, and the better developer you become. Also, React has great error reporting and developer tools, as we're going to see during the demo. It gives you like links to specific pages where you might find the answers, or it might just give you the answer right away in the development console. It is easy to get started. Nowadays, a few years back, you needed to set up a node server and do a lot of other things. Today, you can point to a React library in a package, for example, or use an online IDE like Code Sandbox, and then you get a fully working environment ready to get started. And something that is also very interesting about React is that they have something that is called code mods. So when there is a major upgrade in the React library, these code mods are able to inspect your source code. This is like a command that you execute in the command line. They inspect your source code and they transform your code to the new syntax. We have something similar in Drupal. We have modules that allows you to, let's say, transform Drupal 7 code to Drupal 8 code, or from Drupal 9 to Drupal 8 to Drupal 9. So it's basically the same idea. And the point is that it helps you automate the process of going from one version to the other. With that being said, I would like to jump directly to the demo. As I said, the repository is already available, and the demo itself, we're going to learn from the very basics, going from elements to components to full applications. Okay, so I'm going to share the link here, and this is the repository. The repository is actually a workshop that I have presented in the past, and in the exercise folder, you can get like a step-by-step instructions of what you need to do. Like what I'm going to demonstrate here, it is also like in step-by-step with every one of these is going to give you instructions as what is the goal and how to achieve it. And if you jump to the next one, it will have the solution from the previous exercise. So again, everything that I'm going to show today is open source, it's already available. So there will be questions at the end. Thank for questions at the end, but you can go with over this on your own time. Again, this is the example repository. And this is the application that we're going to build. It is very simple, and this is intentional because we want to focus specifically on the React part and not necessarily on CSS or HTML or something fancy in general. What we're going to do is have a contest of different React applications, and you can vote on your favorite one. Once you vote, all of them are going to be rearranged automatically based on the votes that they have so far. And doing so, it is going to allow us to demonstrate a lot of the concepts. And again, starting from the very basics and then um, building up on previous concepts. So with that in mind, what you see on the left is the start of the application. This is just HTML code, nothing else. I am using a plugin for VS Code that every time that I save the file, it is going to automatically refresh my browser window. It is called Library Load. And I'm also using another one called Prettier that is going to format my source code. So if you see the code moving around, that's the reason why. Okay, so the first step that we're going to do to convert this static website into a React application is include React itself. Actually, in the HTML, we're going to do three things. The first one is include the libraries, and that's what I'm going to do now. For reference, I am going to load a local copy of the library instead of reaching out to Code Sandbox or Unpackage or another place. But either way, it will work the same. As you can see, I am importing two libraries, not only one. React is the core library that is the one that you are going to implement no matter what device or what platform you are targeting. But then we also need to implement the renderer. In this case, we are going to work for the web browser. So the renderer for this one is called React DOM. So once we have React and then React DOM, this means that we're going to be able to write an application for the web browser. In addition to this, what we're going to do as a first step is only going to replace the text that says vote for your favorite one. So I'm going to remove that and I save the file, the text is gone. What I need to do now is provide a mounting point for the React application. So this can be anything. In this case, I'm going to use a div with an ID of React-app, and this is going to serve as my mounting point. The last part is include the JavaScript file where we're going to write our custom code. So again, this is another script. And in this case, it is called script in.js. So in my HTML, those are all the changes that I need to get started. Include the React library and the React DOM library, provide a mounting point, and then include my custom JS. Once I do that, in JavaScript, I also follow a three-step process. I need to create something that is called a React element. Everything is going to be explained. Then I need to get a reference to the mounting point, and then I need to render my element. So to get started, I'm going to create my element. And in this case, I'm going to say const element equals, then the function expects three parameters. The first one is what type of element I want to create. In this case, I'm going to create a p tag. The second one, we're going to pass null for now. And the third one is what text do you want to render? So in this case, it's going to be a string that just says, but for your favorite one. So the basic most atomic element in React is an element. You define the tag. We're going to see in a moment what is the second argument, and then the text that you want to show. The second step is getting a reference to the DOM element. So you can do it with document get element by ID, query selector, or any other way that you feel comfortable with. In my case, I'm going to use the document get element by ID. I'm going to create another constant. I'm going to say DOM container equals document get element by ID. And if you remember, it was React-app. And the last part is I need to render that element into the DOM. So this is the React DOM library working. I pass the element and then the DOM container, like the mounting point. And if I save here, you can see that right away I see the text on my right. One thing that I want to point out here is that if I inspect the source code, you can see that I have my div ID React app. So this is what I have in my HTML, and inside of that div is everything that is going to be rendered by React. At the moment, I am only rendering one p-tag, but eventually we're going to put everything inside the mounting point. So everything is going to be rendered by React. But this is an example of you can go as far as you want. This is just one line, but we're going to do everything. Now, talking about the create element function, in you can pass only 3 arguments, or you can pass more than 3 arguments. And if you pass more, what is going to happen is that that is basically text that you can concatenate over and over. So for example, I just saved this and my formatter put it in multiple lines. That is fine. It's actually easier to read. But as you can see, I save and I get the same result on my right. I get the same result. The only difference is that I am breaking up the string to render in multiple as multiple arguments to the create element function. Why do we do this? Because this will allow us to nest React elements. An example for needing this is that remember that initially we have your favorite in bold, and that was using a strong tag. So I can do something similar. I can create another React element here. In this case, I'm going to say strong tag. I'm going to pass no for now, and then the tag itself. So by doing so, I can inspect the source code if I wanted, and I will see that this is going to be a strong tag wrapped in a p tag, wrapped in my div with the ID that I defined. So the React element, as you can see, you can pass in the third parameter and onwards, you can pass a regular string, or you can pass other calls to React create element to nest more HTML tags. The last thing that I want to point out here is the second argument. This one is one that allows us to pass properties to the React elements themselves. And one of those properties allow us to define classes. So I'm going to, for the p tag, I'm going to pass an object. The property that I need to use in this case is class name with that capitalization, and then the string. This string is going to be a class that it will be applied to the property. So if I say this, you can see that now the text appears uppercase. The reason for this is because in my styles, this is very simple. I have a class called subheading, and I transform the text to uppercase. And if I were to inspect the code here, I can see that I have my p tag with a class subheading being applied. Then I have both for my strong tag and one. So basically, this is transforming what I am representing, like the React elements are being transformed into DOM elements by React DOM. Now you might be thinking, this is a very simple example in the sense of, one line, and it is already like a function nested in another function with some objects in between, and this can get unwieldy pretty quickly. So there sure must be a better way or an easier way, and indeed there is. uh, the React team came up with something that is called JSX, and JSX is an alternative JavaScript syntax that allows us to write in a more familiar way. So to show you how that looks like, I'm going to change this to JSX. And at the moment also will remove the other comments because this is no longer necessary. So what we see here is the JSX syntax. As you can see, this is very familiar to regular HTML. There are a couple of caveats. One is that if you want to define a class, you need to use again class name, because class in JavaScript, remember this is a JavaScript file, is a reserved keyword. So you are not supposed to use it. Um, but everything else is just like regular HTML. Now, after saving the file, you can see that my text is gone. It is no longer there. And why is that? If I inspect the console, I can see an error about a syntax error exception, expected expression got minus a less than sign. So this in here, this is not valid JavaScript code. So we need to do something about that. JSX, even though it is easier for us to read, it is not valid JavaScript. So we need to transform this new syntax into something that the browser can understand. One way to do this is using Babel. There are many ways, but in this example, we're going to use Babel. So what I'm going to do is again add the library. And after adding the library, I'm going to save. And you can see that I keep getting the error. So just adding the library by itself is not enough. What I need to do also is go to the bottom when I add my custom script and add type equals text Babel. That is going to instruct the library that this script needs to be transpiled. Transpiling means converting code from the syntax that we're using, in this case JSX, to something that the browser can understand. And now I save the file, and you can see that my text is back. Something that you will notice is that you are going to get this warning about using the in-browser Babel transformer. This is correct. Like, you are not supposed to be using Babel directly in your browser. The recommended way is to have a build process in which you transform anything that needs to be changed. And at the very end, you produce a bundle, and that bundle is what you serve to the browser. It is not ideal to leave this transformation process to your visitors. So in this case, we're going to continue like this, but normally you're going to use something like Webpack, for example, to create a bundle and ship the final version, the transpiled version. But with this already, we now have a fully functional, simple React application. This in itself is already a React application using JSX. Now, let's say that we like this approach. We want to continue moving other parts of the static page to the React application. So what I'm going to do now is, instead of just rendering one line, I am going to render the whole header. So I'm going to move this, like literally copy and paste. And also here, I'm going to remove this and put it here. So basically, all the header is going to be rendered like that. Um, and that's it. I literally just copy and pasted my code from HTML to JS. And this time I didn't even have to change anything. And if I look at the inspector, I can see that now everything in the header, including the H1, the P, and so on, is part of the Div ID of React app. Everything is being rendered by React now. Something that I want to talk about now is the concept of React components. So the elements are like the atomic parts, And then you can combine multiple elements like we did here. We have a H1, a P1, a header, and so on. But what is the next step after creating elements? You can create components. So a React component is something relatively simple. It is a function. There are many ways to create an element, but in this case, we're going to use a function. The function, it is convention that it starts with an uppercase letter, and what that function, what needs to do is return something. What is that something that needs to be returned? It needs to return a React element that is going to be rendered. So in this case, remember that we had an element here. I'm going to uh, put all of that embedded in here. I can remove this. And now instead of rendering my element variable, I'm going to render my component. And the way that you render a component is like if it were an HTML tag. In this case, it can be self-closing. So as you can see, this is now an element, a React component, and I am rendering it as if it was regular HTML. It is not technically necessary to start with an uppercase, but it is the convention, it is the recommendation. There are a couple of other ways that you can work around this, but it's really best to just follow this approach. One of the reasons is because React needs to be able to differentiate between native HTML tags and custom components. So you can see in this example that I have a header tag and I have a header component. So the way that React tells them apart is by the capital letter in the name. Like if they start with a capital letter, React knows already that this is supposed to be a component that I custom created instead of one that is provided by HTML itself. Um, so now this is a component. Uh, this is fine. I decide that I want to continue using React. What I have seen so far I like, so let's move on. This time I am going to render everything else using React. Not only the header, but also like the candidate list and so on. So as you can see, I literally copy and pasted, well, copy so far, everything there. And I'm going to create a new component. This new component, I'm going to call it candidate list. So candidate list. And remember that I need to return something. And what I'm going to return this. Now, I am getting some errors. This is expected. We're going to fix them one by one. But let's start by looking at the console. We see some JSX errors being mentioned there. But what I want to show is instead of rendering the header, I'm going to render the candidate list. So I try to save again and I still get the error. So why is this? The reason for this is because if you pay close attention, the H2 is at the same level as the section. These are like sibling elements in HTML, for example. And this is not valid in React. There is an assumption that any component can only return one element. You can return any hierarchy that you want, but at the root, you can only have one. So this is a problem. This is the error that we have here. We cannot have that. So there are a couple of ways to work around this. One is putting a div out around everything. So if I were to do this, you can see that this already renders something. But this is not ideal. Why? Because creating markup just for the sake of complying with React expectation, this is not semantic, and we should strive for semantic, accessible websites. So let's not add an empty div just for the sake of complying with a rule and an expectation from the library. So what is an alternative? An alternative is to use something that is called React fragment. So the way that you do it, is that you put it like this. And React fragment is a special React component that when it is going to be rendered and React sees it, it just like prints nothing. It's just like a container. So when you have sibling elements, you can put it on around them, and you will not get the error that you saw before. The other error that we are seeing in the console is that invalid property class, did you mean class name? And this is what I meant about error reporting. Remember that we are not supposed to use the word class in JSX, and we have some example of that here. So instead of saying class, I changed to class name, just like the tools are telling me, I say, and now the error is gone. So what did I have to do? To move all of that section from HTML to CSS, basically two things. One, wrap them in a React fragment, and then change class for class name. So as you can see, there is not a lot of difference between plain HTML and what JSX offers. There is actually a list of about 4 things that are different, and pretty much other than that, it's basically the same syntax. Now, I have this element candidate list. I have this element header. Let's say that I want to, print both of them. Another benefit of creating elements is that you can use them later. So, for example, I'm going to create another element, and in this case, I'm going to actually paste some code that I have prepared. And as you can see, I have a React fragment. And what I'm saying is render my custom header element and render my custom candidate list element. And after doing this, instead of rendering just the candidate list, I render the whole application. And the rating app component, and the rating app component is everything. So far, this is basically moving everything from my HTML. As you can see, my HTML is now pretty thin. Some, script tags, my mounting point, and my custom JavaScript code. Everything else is being rendered directly via JavaScript using React itself. Um, so now we have seen that components can be created, can be reused, and how they are added to the page. But so far, every component that we have created has only been used once. And other benefit of creating component, actually a big one, is the option to reuse them. So we're going to do that. We're going to use a component for the candidates themselves, and this one we are going to reuse. So in this case, I'm going to create another function called candidate, and I'm going try to copy and paste as much as possible. I'm going to return something here. Oh, sorry. And in here, I am going to render the candidate. So now that I have a component for the candidate itself, I can render that component multiple times just by printing it over and over. And you can see that, that is what I got here. So I can see some component reuse already, not the best, but I have something. So how do I make this component more dynamic so that I can pass the information that is going to be rendered inside the component? This is something that is provided by component properties. The way that component properties works is that in the function, you receive an object. Usually that object is called props. And then you print, you have access to anything that is available in that object. For example, instead of hard coding the name, I can say props.name. But where does the name come from? How do I pass this property from my outer component to the inner component? The way that this works is like you pass them as if they were regular HTML attributes. For example, I can say name equals React. So by doing so, I am passing, name equals React. If I do now name equals view, name equals uh, Angular, So now I see React, Vue, and Angular. So just by sending what looks like a HTML attribute, that is going to be collected as a property, and then I have some dynamic code that can be rendered. So I'm going to basically do the same for all of my components. Instead of hard coding the individual values, I am going to pass properties to the candidate component, and that should get me the all the data there. So what I'm going to pass the name, I'm going to pass the year, I'm going to pass the image URL. And when I have that, I am going to update my component. So instead of having a hard coded value like props, I'm going to do it like this. One thing to note is that you can see this is not working. One thing to note is that this that it appears in brackets, this is actually JavaScript code, and in particular, a JavaScript expression. For example, if this were a number, you can do something like number plus one or number plus two or whatever. Like you can have JavaScript code. Anything that appears in the brackets is JavaScript code here. Another thing is that remember that this is a JavaScript file in itself. So anything that you can do in JavaScript, you can try to take benefit from. For example, in this case, I have React logo. I want to make that dynamic as well. So I'm going to change this to another JavaScript expression. Like remember, the square bracket means JavaScript, and what I have inside, this is called a template literal, and I am printing again a variable and then something else. So I am making the alt text also dynamic to include the name of the library itself. This is an example of React not reinventing the way. Like um, it's JavaScript. JavaScript includes template literals, so you just use them. And with this, I have a candidate component that I am using multiple times. In each case, I pass different properties. And by passing those properties, I can customize that component itself to render different information like React, the year, and the logo. Another thing to point about properties is that the name that is used for passing the property does is not a requirement that it corresponds to the HTML attribute, for example, that it will represent inside the candidate itself. For example, the image URL property is going to be assigned to the RCC property of the image tag. So there is no requirement for this to be like a one-to-one mapping. You can put them however you want. And in some cases, for example, like name, those are used as part of the text of an HTML tag, not necessarily an attribute. So keep that in mind. The next thing that I want to talk about is something that is called prop types. And prop types is a way to provide some level of validation for the components. For example, let's say that I am required to provide a name. Otherwise, it will not make sense to render this component. And similarly, I can say that the year is a requirement or that the URL is a requirement. So if I want to provide some validation, you can either use TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, but that is way beyond the scope of this session. So we're not going to use that. Instead, we're going to use something else that is called prop types. Prop types is another library that you can integrate into your code. So I'm going to do that. This is my script. And here I'm going to include the prop types library. And when I do this, I can put code like this. So the way that you define the prop type is that after you have created your component, in this case via function, I say the name of the component dot prop types with that capitalization that is important equals to an object. And this object is going to determine um, what properties are expected, what type they are going to be using, and whether or not they are required or not. In this case, I have name, year, and image URL. And you can see that name is supposed to be a string, year is supposed to be a number, and image URL is supposed to be a string. And all of them are supposed to be required. Let's save this, and we're going to get an error in the console. The error says that candidate is supposed to get a property called year, and that property is supposed to be of type number, but instead I got it of type string. The reason for this is because of the way that I am passing the data. You can see like literally this is a string. There are different ways in which you can pass information from a component to another. I'm not going to dive too deep into this. The final example includes a version where we are passing strings, we're passing functions, and so on. So you can refer to that. But in this case, I just want to point out a couple of things about the proptypes library. One is that you get the errors like the one that you're seeing here. Two, those errors only appear during development. For example, if you were using Webpack and you are going to build a production bundle of your application, all those prop types are not going to be there. This is only for development, and they are not going to be leaked out to the production bundle. That being said, to remove this warning here, I can change this to a string. Again, this is just an example. In real life, in the final example, I am expecting a number. So this is just like to remove the warning there. Let's say, for example, that I remove the name here, or the year here, or the image URL. You're going to get all of those warnings. You are expecting a name, you're expecting a year, you're expecting an image URL. So this is a very light way to provide some sort of validation for your React application. As I said, normally um, you would use this or TypeScript. There are other ways, but this is usually what you do. Now,
Mauricio,
I
I'm sorry to
yes,
interrupt. It's an 8-minute warning.
okay, sounds
Thank you.
good. So in thanks. In the interest of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the final version of the application. And I just want to point out a couple of other things. After talking about prop types, the next thing to talk about is state. A state is a way in which components can um, keep track of themselves. They can store information inside the component itself. For example, if you want to keep the counter of how many votes a particular candidate has received, uh, there is a new API, which is what's being demonstrated here, called React Hooks. And this is how you create a state using React Hooks. Hooks themselves are not only for states, they can be used for other things. In this case, I am using a different hook for side effects. That is something that interacts outside of the application itself. In this case, I am fetching some data from a third-party API, for example. This is the same candidate list components, but as you can see, I have some some hooks being called, some functions being called. At the very end, I have the return. So remember, this is just regular JavaScript. The return value is my JSX code, but as part of the body of the function itself, I can do anything and everything that I need. So the repository has a step-by-step instruction of how to do all of this. In this case, we're passing functions as well, not only like regular text. And this is the data that we are sending to the application. With that said, I'm going to briefly switch back to the presentation just to give you some more pointers. The demo, for the most part, went well. Um, Some other things are why you might want to use React. It is widely adopted, big company, big needs, a lot of jobs. If you need accessibility, SEO, enterprise performance, there are many approaches and libraries that you can use. All of this is available. The slide is going to be shared at the end. How much JavaScript do you need? Not much. Whatever you know already is enough to start. But what you see here are some of the basic constructs that React leverages often. So if you know this, that's great. Otherwise, you can read that blog post and learn what you need to get started. But you don't need to be a JavaScript expert to start with React at all. Some other concepts, proptypes, we talked about this briefly. Context, we didn't talk about this, but this is a way of sharing kind of a global state in your application. Lifecycle method, this is not as common or as popular as it was a couple of years ago. Ever since the hooks API was introduced, this it still applies, but it is not as relevant. And we also talk a little bit about hooks, which is a relatively new API. So with all of that said, my name is Mauricio DINARTE. I go by DINARTE online. That is my email. I am from Nicaragua. It is something like 93 degrees at the moment, so pretty warm. I work with Acari. We are distributed all over the place, some in the States, Nicaragua, Mexico, Germany. I have this as a full course, so if you're interested, check out that URL. And if there is any questions or feedback, I will be here for them.
Thank you, Mauricio. There were a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
One was, I'm not sure if it's your, and thank you, this is very informative, by the way. It was asked if it automatically adds quotes around alt and source attributes, but I'm not sure if that was your code editor or not.
That is a plugin called Prettier for my code editor that automatically adds the quotes. Yes.
Cool, thank you. And another one was, what is the best way to pass Drupal settings or content to React components used on a Drupal page? Say you wanted to replace a menu and have Drupal send the menu content, message JSON into a React components prop to render the menu.
Okay, so this is assuming that you don't have a fully decoupled application. So what the case that I described before. So normally the way that it works is this: you do two things in Drupal. The first one is using, depending on whether it's Drupal 7 or Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, there are different ways in which you can attach JavaScript to the page. So the first thing that you need to do is the bundle that contains your React application, you need to send that. If you're talking about Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, that is done using libraries, a thing library. So you include a library, and the library is going to include the bundle itself that contains your whole React application. Now, how do you send properties to that? Something very similar, depending on the version of Drupal, you pass something that is called Drupal settings, and those Drupal settings are going to become available in the global space under a Drupal settings object. So you can just like in your mounting point in the JavaScript application, you say, I want to read this variable that is globally available, and that is how I pass that down to my components. So let me show you quickly here. Um, so for example, this is my mounting point. So I can say something, and I pass Drupal settings that XYZ. This is like not valid. This is not the right name, but this is the idea. Like in your main application, the mounting point, you just pass you can pass the full settings object and then process that internally, or you can pass the individual settings that you care about. But that's the way that you would do it.
Thank you. And I guess the question about the quotes was from Benji. He in the chat window, he mentioned it was in a curly bracket, which is what it expects, I guess. It'll add the quotation marks after.
Oh, okay.
And then,
I guess I misunderstood the question, but this is yes, the square bracket. This is just like
exactly.
saying I want to print something, and this something happens to be a string.
Okay, thank you. And another quick question is, are there any known challenges between React and Drupal?
Whew. Well, uh, I guess that the biggest challenge is not in the technology themselves, is like how you want to implement them. For example, if you want to implement a fully decoupled architecture, like Drupal is your backend, React is your frontend, then you need to re-implement a lot of the things that Drupal will give you for granted. For example, the theme system already includes you know, some functionality to provide security. It provides functionality for accessibility. It provides functionality for SEO. And even if it doesn't come with Drupal core, you can add modules, for example, to add meta tags, for example. All of that you lose if you decide to go fully decoupled. So in that case, you are going to find other ways. And in React itself, there are libraries for those things. But basically, you are going to have to re-implement some of the features that Drupal will give you out of the box. And everything has a trade-off. React has its own benefits by itself, but Drupal already gives you a lot of things already. So it's a choice that you need to make. I guess that's like when you go fully decoupled, that's the biggest challenge. Other than that, if you are having like a partial React application, you can see just like one more library, like jQuery. So you have another library at your disposal. You pass data to that library, like what I showed a moment ago, and then once the data has been loaded into React, it can do basically anything that you instruct it to do.
Thank you so much, Mauricio. I guess we're at about time. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was super helpful, and the information to reach you is in the slides as well. Thank you. I'll
Yes,
stop the
and
recording.
this I'm going to share. Yep. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.